All right, my students, let's see how you and your group did with the cosmic survey. Well, first of all, Aristotle's pretty arrogant, isn't he? He thinks a whole lot of himself. And I hope, like me, you disagreed with him about the Earth being the center of the solar system. That has been for sure disproven. The sun is certainly the center. But now let's get into our cosmic survey questions. So, the Hubble Space Telescope, let me tell you a little about it. It is what it sounds like, a telescope in space. And it actually does not have to look through Earth's atmosphere, so it makes much clearer pictures. But it is only 40 feet long. It's about the size of a 4-story building. So you were correct if you said the Hubble was the smallest. Now, next is our moon. Our moon is the next smallest. The diameter all the way across is only 2,000 miles. I say only because that's about the distance from here to California. So maybe like a 4-hour flight would be the distance you could go. Now we get into some bigger things. Saturn is next. So look at the moon again. Our moon is 2,000 miles across, and this does include the rings. Saturn is 75,000 miles across, but it pales in comparison to the size of our sun. Now, our sun is a star. It makes its own light and heat, and it is pretty close to 1,000,000 miles across. It's 875,000 miles across, so much bigger than even the second biggest planet, which is Saturn. By the way, Jupiter is the biggest. So far, if you were right, you would have said smallest, the telescope, then our moon, then Saturn, then the sun. Now, next biggest, and check out this number. 60 trillion miles. This is the Pleiades star cluster. So this is more than one star, and the distance across this star cluster is 60 trillion miles. Now, Mrs. Engineer, Mrs. Fitz, and Mr. Wills would say, why don't we use scientific notation? Remember how you do that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that'd be 6.0 times 10 to the 13th power. But that is small compared to this. So the Whirlpool galaxy is not just one cluster of stars. This bright center that you see would probably be hundreds of thousands of stars. It is 600,000 trillion miles across. And then you were definitely correct if you put the largest was the Hubble Deep Field Galaxy. See, look at this progression. One star cluster, an entire galaxy, which is kind of like a whole neighborhood of stars. And then this is more than one galaxy. So I'll tell you, when this first became a published picture, it kind of floored me. Let me explain why. Like, and when I look at this one right here, that to me looks kind of like a galaxy. Galaxies aren't one star, they're hundreds of thousands to millions of stars. But here's where it got crazy to me. Every speck of light you see is a separate star. Excuse me, I just misspoke. They look like separate stars. Every speck of light is a separate galaxy, like an entire set of stars. So what looks like one star could really be millions. It's just far away. Okay, so there's the how big question. Okay, now what about the how far from Earth question? Hubble was the smallest. It's also the closest to Earth, only 350 miles. Now that is in space. That's out of our atmosphere. But it's quite close. 350 miles would be like driving the diagonal distance across Ohio, if to give you an idea. Now, the moon, though, our moon looks pretty big because it's pretty close, but it isn't that close. It's 250,000 miles from us, but it's on our gravity leash since it's so much smaller. Okay, now what about this? Our sun. Okay, so the moon is 250,000 miles. Our sun is 93 million miles away from us. Okay, so are you starting to see this kind of pattern? This is orbiting Earth, so is this, but at a much further orbital path. We are orbiting the sun, but then we got into a little bit of a problem. Okay, do you know the order of the planets? So it goes the sun, then Mercury, Venus, Earth is third, then it goes Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. So it kind of makes it look like the Earth is right in between the sun and Saturn, and it is totally not. We are way closer to the sun. The inner planets are squished kind of close to the sun. So Earth is 93 million miles from the sun, but 7,900 million, or excuse me, 790 million miles from Saturn. Okay, now we have the Pleiades star cluster. So everything you've seen so far is in our solar system. And when I ask students about our solar system and I say, how many stars in our solar system? Sometimes students will say millions, and that is completely wrong. Solar means sun. There is only one star in our solar system, and this is it. So you can think of our solar system like our neighborhood in space. All of those, the planets, the sun, and the Hubble Space Telescope, our moon, they're in our solar system. This is not. The Pleiades star cluster, though, is in the Milky Way galaxy, and you can probably find it with that Skyview Light app. The Pleiades star cluster, on average, here's a big number, 2,400 trillion miles away, and that's in our galaxy. Now, this next one is in our universe, but not in our galaxy. And this is just numbers we have trouble fathoming. 200 million trillion miles away. And then look at that number, 300 billion trillion miles away on average for the Hubble Deep Field galaxies. So these look so small because they're much further away. It's kind of overwhelming when we start to think of distances in space and where does space end. But the key idea really here is if it's in our solar system, like the first four images, it's quite close comparatively. Then if it's in our galaxy, it's closer than if it's a totally different faraway galaxy. Okay, now let's get into the age. The age of the Hubble Space Telescope is not very old, just a couple decades. It's man-made, so you probably got that as the youngest. Now, here's where people get like crazy. This is second. The Pleiades star cluster, those are actually baby stars. Some of you have heard this before, that stars are born and that they die out, and these are pretty new stars. So these have not been around nearly as long as some of the other things. Now, you might think, well, what yard line would this be on? This would be on like the 1.6 yard line near the Todean zone when these stars were born. And scientists know their age based on what they're made of, the gases that they have in them. Now, this is where I did a dirty trick. Those are all a tie. So for sure, the youngest is the Space Telescope. For sure, second youngest is the Pleiades star cluster. And then these are considered a tie because scientists know that our solar system was formed about 4.5 billion years ago. Sometimes you hear 4.6. And they know these things really based on radiometric dating of rocks. Now, here's the one, though, that gets a little trickier. So when you get into how old is the universe, scientists disagree on this. There's ideas of 10 to 15 billion years old. And you might be like, well, how do scientists know that? And it has to do with the speed that things are traveling and getting away from each other. But these two, they believe, these two faraway galaxies point to the beginning of our universe at about 10 billion years. So here that is again. So the youngest is definitely the Space Telescope, then the Pleiades star cluster. Then there's a three-way tie with Saturn, Sun, and our moon, because those are in our solar system, and scientists think our whole solar system formed at the same time. And then the faraway galaxies are the oldest. So I hope you enjoyed this thinking. The rest of the week, we are going to be really focusing on some of your I wonder questions and looking at some weird data, figuring out why the moon changes phase. I think you're in for a good final week of learning.